A stranger walked up to me at my father's funeral reception and pressed a thick manila envelope into my hands. She leaned close, her perfume mixing with the smell of lilies and coffee, and whispered, "Your father gave me very specific instructions. He said to hand this to you when they showed their true colors." Before I could even ask her name, my brother Kyle snatched the envelope from my fingers, laughing. "What is this? Another one of Dad's little art projects for his favorite charity case." He tore it open, and the room went dead silent. I'm Brooke, 35 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer from a small apartment that smells like acrylic paint and cold coffee most mornings. I build logos and brand kits for small businesses, and I love what I do. But to my family, my career was always a joke. My older brother Kyle is 41, a regional sales manager who never lets anyone forget his salary. My sister Dawn is 38, married to a contractor, and obsessed with the appearance of success. Together they formed this tight little unit that decided years ago I was the weak link. The flaky artist. The dreamer who never grew up. They said it at holidays, at birthdays, at random Tuesday dinners. Brooke's still doing her little computer drawings. Brooke can't even afford a real house. Brooke doesn't live in the real world. I heard every version of that sentence you can imagine, and after a while, I stopped defending myself. I just smiled and passed the potatoes. But here is the thing they never talked about. When our father, William, was diagnosed with early-onset vascular dementia at 67, Kyle didn't rearrange his schedule. Dawn didn't offer to drive him to appointments. I did. For 3 full years, I was the one who moved my work schedule around his doctor visits. I was the one who learned how to manage his medication, how to handle his sundowning episodes, how to keep him calm when he forgot where he was. I sat with him at 2 in the morning when he woke up scared and confused, holding his hand and talking softly until the fear passed. I cooked his meals. I cleaned his house. I bathed him when he could no longer do it alone. I did all of this while still freelancing, still paying my rent, still trying to hold my own life together with both hands. Kyle visited maybe once a month, usually for 20 minutes, usually on his way to somewhere else. Dawn came on holidays and spent most of the time redecorating rooms Dad didn't ask her to touch. Neither of them ever changed a bedsheet. Neither of them ever sat through a neurologist appointment. Neither of them ever held Dad's hand at 3 in the morning while he cried because he couldn't remember Mom's face. But I was the flaky one. I was the one who didn't have it together. That's the story they told, and that's the story the rest of the family believed. Except Dad. Dad saw everything. He knew exactly who showed up and who didn't. He knew who wiped his tears and who wiped their hands of him. And even as his memory slipped, even as the world got fuzzier around the edges, he never once forgot that. I was the one he trusted most. That was never in question. Not for him. If you've ever been the invisible caregiver in your family, the one who gave up weekends, sleep, and pieces of your own life for someone you loved while your siblings collected praise for doing nothing, then this story is for you. Drop a heart in the comments if you've lived this. Tell me your story. Because what my siblings did next, after everything I sacrificed, will make your blood run cold. And what my father left behind to protect me. That changed everything. Dad passed on a Thursday morning in April. Quietly. Peacefully. I was holding his hand when it happened. The hospice nurse said he went easy, and I believed her because the tension in his face had finally softened into something that looked like rest. I sat with him for a long time after. The room was still. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin golden stripes across the blanket. The only sound was the ticking of the old mantel clock he'd kept from his parents' house. I didn't cry right away. I just breathed. 3 years of holding everything together, and in that moment, the weight finally settled into my bones. Kyle and Dawn arrived hours later. Kyle looked annoyed, like he'd been pulled from something important. Dawn walked in already on her phone, talking to someone about flower arrangements. Neither of them asked me how I was. Neither of them asked what Dad's last moments were like. They just started planning. The memorial was held the following Saturday at the Lakeview Country Club, a place Dad never would have chosen. He hated that club. He called it a showroom for people with more money than sense. But Dawn insisted, because appearances mattered to Dawn. The service was fine. People said kind things. A few of Dad's old fishing buddies told stories that actually sounded like him. But when the formal part ended and the luncheon began, that is when my siblings revealed exactly who they were. Carl stood up at the head of the long banquet table, tapping his glass with a knife like he was giving a toast at his own wedding. "I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate our father," he said, voice loud, chin high. "Dawn and I have spent the last few weeks handling Dad's estate, and we want everyone to know that everything has been taken care of. The house, the accounts, the investments. It's all been reviewed and divided fairly between the family." I blinked. I hadn't been told about any of this. No one had called me. No one had emailed me a single document. I looked at Dawn, who smiled at me the way you smile at a child who wandered into an adult conversation. "We didn't want to bother you with the details, Brooke," she said sweetly. "You've been through so much already." Kyle nodded. "Yeah, we figured you had enough on your plate with your little art stuff. Dawn and I handled the lawyers, the paperwork, all of it." He paused, grinning. "Oh, but don't worry. You can keep Dad's fishing rods. I know you two used to like sitting out on that dock." A few people laughed. Not many, but enough. I felt my face go hot. Not from embarrassment. From something deeper. Something that tasted like metal on my tongue. 3 years. 3 years I gave everything I had to that man, and they were dividing his estate at a country club luncheon like I was a distant cousin they barely remembered. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, I felt a hand on my elbow. The stranger. A woman I had never seen before, maybe in her early 60s, dressed in a dark blue suit with kind but serious eyes. She was the one who had pressed the envelope into my hands minutes earlier, the one Kyle had snatched it from. She leaned close. "Read it now, sweetheart," she said softly. "Your father told me this moment would come." Kyle had torn the envelope open, but barely looked inside before tossing it on the table like junk mail. I picked it up. Inside were 2 things. The first was a legal document, heavy paper with official seals and notarized signatures. It was a deed. To the lake house. Dad's lake house. The one on Silver Creek where we spent every summer of my childhood. The place where he taught me to fish, to swim, to paint watercolors on the dock while the sun went down. The deed was in my name. Only my name. The second item was a handwritten letter. Dad's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. "Brooke, if you're reading this, then they've done exactly what I knew they would. Don't let them take this from you. The lake house is yours. You earned it. You stayed. I love you, sweetheart. Always. Dad." My hands were trembling. Not from sadness. From something that felt like justice arriving early. I looked up from the letter and the room was watching me. I held the deed up so Kyle could see it. His smile faded like someone had pulled a plug. "What is that?" he asked. "The lake house," I said calmly. "Dad left it to me." The next 48 hours were chaos. Kyle called me 11 times in one day. Dawn sent a group text to every relative we had, calling me a manipulator. She said I had taken advantage of Dad's condition. She said I had probably forged the documents. She said I had weaseled my way into an old man's good graces while he was too sick to know better. That one stung the most, because it described exactly what I hadn't done. But it didn't matter what the truth was. Not to them. The first real betrayal came 3 days after the memorial. Kyle and Dawn organized a family meeting at Dawn's house. I walked in thinking maybe we could talk. Maybe they'd calm down. I was wrong. There were 8 people in that living room. Aunts, uncles, Kyle, Dawn, Dawn's husband Rich. They were all sitting in a circle like some kind of intervention. Kyle stood in the center. "Brooke," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "we love you, but we think you need to be honest about what happened with Dad." He turned to the room. "We believe this deed was forged. Dad was not mentally capable of signing legal documents in his last year. Brooke had full access to him, and she could have made him sign anything." Dawn nodded, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We're not trying to be mean. We just want what's fair." Fair. The word hung in the air like smoke. I looked around the room. Not one of them had changed a bedsheet. Not one of them had driven Dad to a single appointment. But they all nodded along, because Kyle spoke loud and Dawn cried pretty. The second betrayal was worse. 2 weeks later, I drove out to the lake house to check on it. When I pulled up, the locks had been changed. There were cars in the driveway. Music was playing from inside. I walked around to the back and saw them through the big glass doors. Kyle, Dawn, Rich, a group of their friends. They were having a party. In my lake house. On my dock. Drinking from Dad's glasses. Dawn had posted photos on social media with the caption, "Enjoying our family inheritance." Dad would have loved this. She tagged Kyle. She didn't tag me. I stood on the gravel path behind the house, listening to the sound of laughter coming from inside, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. Certainty. I knew what I had to do. The third betrayal was the most calculated. Kyle and Dawn hired a lawyer and filed a formal lawsuit contesting the deed. Their claim was that Dad lacked the mental capacity to execute any legal documents in his final 2 years of life. They argued that the deed was invalid and that I had exerted undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. The language of the lawsuit was clinical and cruel. It described me as an unemployed dependent who had isolated the decedent from his other children. Isolated. I was the only one who showed up. But on paper, that became isolation. I didn't panic. I didn't call them screaming. I didn't post anything online. I went home, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and got to work. Because what Kyle and Dawn didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. You see, Dad was sharp for longer than anyone gave him credit for. The dementia was real, yes. It was progressive, yes. But in his early stages, and even well into the middle stages, he had long stretches of clarity. Windows where he was completely himself. Lucid, aware, sometimes painfully so. And during those windows, he talked to me. He told me things. He told me he knew Kyle only came around when he wanted something. He told me Dawn had already asked about the value of the house twice before he was even sick enough to need help. He told me he had watched his children circle like vultures, and it broke his heart. And then he told me to start recording. "Brooke," he said one afternoon, sitting in his old recliner by the window, the smell of pine coming through the screen door, "I need you to document everything. Every visit they make. Every conversation. Every phone call. Save the texts. Save the voicemails. Because when I'm gone, they're going to try to take everything and they're going to say I didn't know what I was doing." I looked at him. His eyes were sharp that day. Crystal clear. "Dad, are you sure?" He nodded slowly. "I've never been more sure of anything. They'll come for the lake house first. It's worth the most. And they'll say I was crazy when I signed it over to you. So we need proof that I wasn't." That conversation happened 3 years before he died. For 3 full years, I recorded. Not secretly. Not maliciously. But carefully and consistently. I recorded every visit Kyle made, which totaled 14 in 3 years. I recorded the conversations where he asked Dad about money. I recorded the time Dawn brought a realtor to the house, just to get a sense of value, while Dad sat in the next room, fully aware of what she was doing. I saved every text message. Every voicemail where Kyle said he was too busy to come by. Every group chat message where Dawn discussed selling Dad's belongings before he had even passed. I stored it all in a cloud folder. Organized by date. Labeled clearly. Backed up in 3 places. Dad helped me label some of the early files. He even dictated notes for a few of them during his clear moments. November 14th, he said into my phone one evening, his voice steady. Kyle visited for 12 minutes. Asked about the truck title. Did not ask about my health. Brooke made me dinner and stayed until I fell asleep. And then there was the final recording. The one that mattered most. It was made 11 months before Dad died, during one of his best days. He was sitting at the kitchen table, freshly shaved, wearing his favorite flannel shirt. The light was warm and soft through the window. He looked directly into the camera and spoke clearly. "My name is William Hale. I am 69 years old. I am of sound mind today, and I want to make something very clear. I am giving the lake house on Silver Creek to my daughter Brooke Hale. She is the only one of my children who stayed. She is the only one who cared for me. Kyle and Dawn will try to fight this. They will say I didn't know what I was doing. But I do. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I know exactly what they are. He paused, and then he smiled. Sad and knowing. They'll probably throw a party in the house before the ink is dry. What they didn't know is that their father had predicted every single move they made. And what they really didn't know was that every piece of evidence they thought didn't exist was already organized, time-stamped, and ready to be played in a room full of lawyers. I didn't fight this alone. About a week after the lawsuit was filed, I got a phone call from my cousin Jenna. Jenna was 32, the daughter of my mom's younger sister, and she had always been treated like an outsider by Kyle and Dawn. They called her dramatic. They called her a troublemaker. They excluded her from family events and talked about her behind her back. Jenna and I had stayed close through the years, mostly through late-night texts and occasional coffee meetups. She was one of the only people who ever asked how I was doing during those 3 years of caregiving. She called me the day after she found out about the lawsuit. "Brooke, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tight. "Dawn called me last year. She wanted me to testify that Uncle Will was confused and couldn't make decisions. She offered to cut me in on the estate if I backed their story." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "What did you say?" I told her no. And then I recorded the call. Jenna had her own proof. She had screenshots of texts from Dawn asking her to lie. She had a voicemail from Kyle pressuring her to stay on the right side of this. She had notes from a visit where she witnessed Dad clearly and coherently discussing his wishes for the lake house. Jenna was my ally. The only one. And she was ready. Meanwhile, Kyle and Dawn were not slowing down. 2 weeks before the scheduled mediation, they threw another party at the lake house. A big one. They invited 30 people. They set up lights on the dock and hired a caterer. Dawn posted a video on social media, walking through the house, pointing out the rooms. "This is where Dad used to sit," she said, panning the camera across the living room. "We're so blessed to have this place in the family." Kyle appeared in the background, raising a glass. "To Dad," he said. Someone off camera laughed. They posted another video the next day. This one was worse. Dawn sat on the porch swing, the same swing where Dad and I used to sit and watch the sun go down, and said, "Some people think they deserve more than others just because they played nurse for a few years. But family is about fairness. And we're going to make sure this stays fair." She looked directly into the camera when she said it. That video was clearly meant for me. I watched it once. Then I saved it to the cloud folder. They went into mediation believing I had nothing. No lawyer worth worrying about. No evidence. No fight left. They scheduled it for a Tuesday at 10 in the morning, and Kyle told relatives it would be wrapped up by lunch. They were half right. It was wrapped up by lunch. Just not the way they expected. The mediation was held in a conference room on the 4th floor of a downtown office building. The walls were pale gray. The carpet smelled like cleaning solution. A long table sat in the center of the room with chairs on either side, and a mediator at the head. Her name was Dr. Linden, a retired family court judge. She had silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of face that made it clear she had heard every lie in the book. Kyle and Dawn sat on one side with their attorney, a man in a pinstripe suit who kept clicking his pen. They looked relaxed, confident. Dawn had even dressed up, pearls and a blazer, like she was attending a board meeting. Kyle was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, smirking at me the way he always did. I sat on the other side with my attorney, a woman named Sandra Cho, who spoke softly but never wasted a word. Jenna sat beside me, a folder on her lap. The mediator opened the session and asked both sides to make their positions clear. Kyle's attorney went first. He talked for 12 minutes. He described me as unstable, financially desperate, and emotionally manipulative. He said Dad's dementia made him incapable of understanding legal documents. He said the deed was likely the result of coercion by a financially dependent family member. Kyle nodded along the whole time. Dawn dabbed her eyes again. Then their attorney made the offer. "In the interest of family unity," he said, "my clients are prepared to offer Brooke Hale a one-time payment of $20,000 in exchange for relinquishing all claims to the lake house property." $20,000. The lake house was worth over $600,000. They wanted to pay me pocket change and send me away. Kyle leaned forward. It's more than fair, Brooke. You don't even have a real job. The mediator looked at me. Would you like to respond? I nodded. Sandra stood and placed a laptop on the table. We'd like to present evidence of Mr. William Hale's mental capacity and clearly documented wishes regarding the lake house property. She pressed play. For the next 4 minutes, the room was silent except for my father's voice. The video played on the screen. Dad, sitting at the kitchen table, freshly shaved, flannel shirt, sunlight on his face. Speaking clearly. Naming me. Naming the property. Explaining exactly why. She is the only one of my children who stayed. His voice filled the room. Steady. Calm. Undeniable. Then Sandra played 3 more clips. Dad discussing his wishes with a neighbor. Dad on the phone with his attorney confirming the deed. Dad in a conversation with me where he described Kyle and Dawn's behavior in specific, accurate detail. Then Jenna opened her folder. She presented the screenshots of Dawn asking her to lie. The voicemail from Kyle pressuring her. Her own written account of witnessing Dad's lucidity. And then Sandra delivered the final piece. A certified independent cognitive evaluation performed by a board-licensed neuropsychologist 9 months before Dad's death, confirming that William Hale possessed sufficient mental capacity to understand and execute legal documents at the time the deed was signed. Kyle's attorney stopped clicking his pen. Dawn's face went white. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. The mediator reviewed the evidence for 40 minutes. She asked Kyle's attorney if he wished to challenge any of the recordings. He did not. She asked if there was any counter-evidence of incapacity. There was none. At 11:47 in the morning, Dr. Linden issued her recommendation. The deed was valid. The lake house belonged to me. Furthermore, based on the social media posts, the public statements, and the family meeting where I was accused of forgery in front of relatives, she recommended that I pursue a formal claim for defamation and slander. Sandra had already filed the paperwork. The court later awarded me damages. Kyle and Dawn were ordered to pay my legal fees, reimburse the cost of the changed locks, and cover the damages from their unauthorized use of the property. Kyle didn't look at me as he left the room. Dawn said nothing. Her pearls caught the light as she stood, and for the first time in my life, I saw her hands shaking. I spent that first summer at the lake house the way Dad would have wanted. Quietly. I repainted the porch. I fixed the dock railing. I planted a small garden near the back fence with tomatoes and basil because Dad always talked about doing that and never got around to it. Jenna came up for a long weekend in July. We sat on the dock with our feet in the water, eating sandwiches and not saying much. It was the kind of peace that doesn't need words. A few of my closest friends visited throughout the summer. We had bonfires and cooked fish from the lake and watched the stars come out over the tree line. The sound of the water lapping against the dock at night became my favorite sound in the world. I blocked Kyle's number. I blocked Dawn's. I blocked their spouses and their social media accounts. Not out of anger. Out of peace. I was done performing for people who never saw me. I heard through Jenna that they tried to appeal the mediation outcome. It went nowhere. I heard Dawn told people I had stolen the lake house. I didn't respond. Some truths don't need defending. They just need time. I sat on the porch swing one evening in August, the same swing from Dawn's video, and I watched the sun go down over Silver Creek. The air smelled like pine and warm wood. A heron stood in the shallows near the dock, completely still. I thought about Dad. I thought about those 3 years. The sleepless nights. The hard days. The moments where I wondered if anyone would ever see what I had given. He saw it. He planned for it. He made sure the truth would outlive the lies. And that evening, for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the quiet child had finally been heard. Not because I shouted. Because the truth did. If you have a sibling who tried to erase you from your family story, who told everyone you didn't matter while you were the one doing the hard work behind closed doors, I want to hear from you. What did they try to take from you? Was it an inheritance? A home? Your reputation? Your peace? You don't have to stay silent anymore. This comment section is yours. Tell me what they took and how you got it back. Or tell me what you're still fighting for. Because every story shared here reminds someone else that they're not alone. And if this story felt personal, if it hit somewhere deep, then share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who stayed. If this story reminded you that the people who show up, day after day, without applause or recognition, are the ones who truly matter, then you already know why stories like this need to be told. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another one. Hit the notification bell so the next story finds you before anyone else. And remember, the truth doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrives in a thick envelope at a funeral, handed to you by a stranger, right on time. I'll see you in the next one.